The last time we were able to get together, we were going through the book of Numbers, so we're going to just pick up and we'll finish the book of Numbers and then move to a New Testament book. We like to alternate back and forth. So tonight we're going to be in Numbers chapter 15. So as you're turning to Numbers 15, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, I'll share something with you that's really kind of humorous. I enjoy online gaming, and one of the games I play has had an issue with people cheating. So they download hacks to help them cheat in the game. And if you think someone's cheating, you can report them and the company investigates. And if they determine that they are cheating, they do not block them from the game. It's even better. They're flagged, but they don't know that they're flagged. And the next time they get on, it puts them in a lobby with nothing but cheaters. So they don't realize that everybody else in their lobby they're all cheaters. So I thought that's actually pretty good. So yeah, it's rather a novel way of. A lot of, and I don't really understand. It's a free game, and it's not like there's money or you're competing or a job. I don't understand why people want to cheat anyway. But it's pretty humorous. You don't know that you're been caught, and you don't know that in your lobby with all cheaters, and you're probably wondering, how'd that guy shoot me through a wall? Well, it's easy to wall hack and an aimbot, and so. All right, so the book of Numbers is really unusual. I do not believe it was ever written. I think it is a collection from Moses' memoirs over their 40 years in the wilderness. So it is sometimes kind of choppy because he didn't just sit down and write it. He's kind of, have you ever read Little House on the Prairie books? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And did you read all of them? Yeah. Okay. If you remember, the last one is very rough and difficult because it's just a collection of Laura Ingalls Wilder's memoirs that had not been smoothed out into book form yet. And so they left, if you buy the set, the last one is kind of rough that way because it hasn't been smoothed. And that's kind of the way Numbers is. It's a little rough because it's just kind of the memoirs of Moses over this course of 40 years in the wilderness. And we'll see some of that in chapter 15 as well. So we get this phrase quite a bit. The Lord spoke to Moses. He is the intermediary between the people and God and between God and the people. So God tells Moses and then Moses tells the people. So the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land you are to inherit, which I am giving you." Now, when did God give them the land? That's a trick question. Abraham. Joshua. He says, it's really interesting in the book of Joshua, he says, "I'm giving you the land I've given you." And literally in Hebrew is what it is. In some translations, "You're possessing the land I promised you." But basically, God gave it to them when he promised it to them, to Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis. But they didn't happen until the days of Joshua when they actually went in and took the land. And so God says, I'm here, when you get there, that I'm in the process of giving to you. "And you offer to the Lord from the herd or from the flock a food offering or a burnt offering or sacrifice to fulfill a vow or as a freewill offering or at your appointed feast to make a pleasing aroma to the Lord." Now let's talk, there's a whole lot here and we're going to drill down on the most important part. So we have a couple different types of offerings: a flock, some kind of animal that you're going to give. A burnt offering is the whole thing. Matter of fact, the Hebrew word is the word olah, which means the whole thing goes up. And if you take the word olah and work it through a couple of other languages, it actually becomes holocaust. The word holocaust means a whole burnt offering because they were offered up in the crematorium. That's why it's called the Holocaust. Or most Jews call it the Shoah, but that's where the word comes from. And so the whole burnt offering is the whole thing goes up. It all literally goes up in smoke to the Lord. Now, why in the world would you offer one of these things? Well, to fulfill a vow. And there are two kinds of vows. There is the pre-planned vow. Then there is the "God, if you get me out of this, I will" vow. And you find both those in the Bible. And so regardless of which one it is, you've made a vow, and so you're going to fulfill it, you're going to keep it. A free will offering is for no purpose other than to say, "I love you." So here's about the closest equivalent I can come up with to what a free will offering is. If you are married, it is a good idea for you to get flowers or candy or something on Valentine's Day. Really? At least you said it in this direction and didn't look over at Johnny and go, did you hear that? Man, as long as y'all been married, I would think you'd have gotten it together by now, Johnny. So it's a good idea to get a gift, a card, or whatever it is on her birthday. It is good for your health and safety to get her something on your anniversary. Those are all like the vow things, like these are. But it's also a good idea sometime when it's just a normal day, it's just a Thursday, to buy flowers. There's no occasion. Maybe you did something wrong. That doesn't count. That fits in like with the Valentine's thing. You just showed up just to say, I love you. And look, guys, right now, a dozen roses is $6 at the grocery store. I realize they're going to last 4 or 5 days, but still, it's not a bad deal. It's cheaper than McDonald's. And so that's the free will offering. There's nothing connected to it. It's just wanted to say, I love you, Lord. That's why it's called a free will offering. Then you have the appointed feasts, which at this point there were only 3. 2 more will be added later. So we have some specific times. What we typically think of as holidays, but they're also like religious holidays. So Easter, Christmas, and there are certain things that we kind of anticipate go with those. So you have those that are the vows you made, those that are kind of assigned to everybody, the appointed feasts, and then the free will. So whatever type of animal bring or whatever the reason for doing it, we want it to be a pleasing aroma to the Lord. What is a pleasing aroma? The word pleasing is actually the word for rest, or to be at peace, or to be calm. So here's the crazy thing. If it's pleasing to God, it calms him. You go, well, now wait a minute. Now he's God. He's like all emotional like that? No, but how is he going to describe God except in human terms? If we described him in divine terms, none of us would understand because we're humans. So the Bible describes him oftentimes with human characteristics. What happens if we live in disobedience to God? We experience the wrath of God, the anger of God. So this is the opposite of that. We've offered something that is pleasing to the Lord. And what is it about this offering that's pleasing? I doubt it's the smell. Burnt cow, actually I like it because I eat my meat well done, but they burn the hide and everything. So you throw the whole animal up there, you burn the whole thing. It doesn't smell that good. So it's not the smell itself, but it is the act of what the offerer is doing. The person is bringing the offering. That's what makes a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So if we're going to do that, verse 4, then he who brings his offering shall offer to the Lord a grain offering of 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour, mixed with 1/4 of a hin of oil. I can't measure stuff, and if I tried to cook that recipe, it better be specific about everything. If it says, y'all know my story about the lemon zest, when I went to the store and couldn't find it, so I looked online, you'd shave the lemon. When it says some lemon zest, salt and pepper to taste, you can't salt and pepper stuff to taste before you cook it. Like that's what you do afterwards. It needs more salt. So I needed to be very specific. But I'll be honest with you, I've never cooked and I've never looked at a recipe and said you need an ephah of fine flour. Ephah is about 4 to 6 gallons. We're going to say roughly about 6. The reason is because a hin is a gallon. And a hin is roughly the equivalent. 25 hin is the equivalent of 4 ephah, which makes it about 6 gallons probably. So 6 gallons of fine flour, and then it's mixed with about a gallon of oil. So mix all this up, and you will offer with a burnt offering or for the sacrifice 1/4 of a hin, that's a quart, of wine for the drink offering for each lamb. Or for a ram, you'll offer a grain offering 2/10 of an ephah, that's whatever, it's a little bit under a quart, of fine flour mixed with a third of a hin of oil. And for the drink offering, you shall offer a third of a hin of wine, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And when you offer a bull as a burnt offering or sacrifice to fulfill a vow or for peace offerings to the Lord, then one shall offer with the bull a grain offering of 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with half hin of oil. And you will offer for the drink offering half a hin of wine as a food offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Now let's be honest. If you read this, you're thinking, I have no idea what in the world is going on. You need like a scorecard because we have a 2/10 of an ephah and you're mixing, we've offered this kind of thing and all that sort of jazz. So I want to say a couple things about this. First of all, how many times in the Bible is an individual Israelite commanded to offer a sacrifice? Anybody want to take a guess? How many sacrifices was a typical, just average Ezekiel Naphtali? How many offerings is he commanded to sacrifice? That would be 0. There's not a single command for an individual anywhere in the Old Testament to offer a sacrifice. If you read the first 6 chapters of the book of Leviticus, which are a description of the sacrifices, it says, when you bring a grain offering, here's how you do it. When you bring a whole burnt offering, if your offering is, then this is how it is to be done. Now, there is a command for the high priest to make a sacrifice on the Day of Atonement. And there's a couple more that are related to ordaining priests. But for the average Israelite, there's no command to sacrifice at all. Instead, what we have is God says, look, sacrifice is a natural human drive. Even the Quran has sacrifice, but no reason for it. But it does because people just have this drive to sacrifice. Matter of fact, we have the first couple, Adam and Eve, very good. And they have 2 sons, Cain and Abel, very good. And in the course of time, what do Cain and Abel do? They bring an offering to the Lord. No command. It's just a natural human kind of. So what God says is, look, when you fulfill this natural human inclination that we have, you're going to do it the way I tell you to do it. I'm going to set some standards. Here is how I want you to do it. Now, it's interesting. When you recognize that, you suddenly realize that much of the Bible, Old and New Testament, are not commands like we think of orders, this is what you will do. Instead, they are guidelines for natural human inclinations. So, for example, Jesus doesn't say there's no command to pray the Lord's Prayer. What does he do? When you pray, here are the guidelines. Here is how you pray. So it's guidelines for that. So there's no command to marry. But if you marry, here are the guidelines about who you marry. And so there's no commands to have kids. If you have kids, here are the guidelines for raising them. So the Bible is a lot of the Bible are guidelines. If you're going, when you do this natural human drive, this is how you do it. Now, why is that so vitally important? Because what do we do otherwise? Well, we tend to offer to an idol instead of the true God. We think that somehow we're feeding God, like he's hungry. That was the way most of the ancient world thought. When you offer sacrifice, God's hungry and we're feeding him. And a well-fed man is a happy man. And so we're going to feed God and he'll be a happy man and everything is good. And that's kind of sort of the way that they viewed it. And so, does anybody remember God owns the cattle on what? 1,000 hills. Most people don't know the context of that psalm. Actually, the context is God says, I don't want your offerings. I'm not hungry. If I was hungry, I'd go eat because I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. And so God, so we're not feeding him. We have all kinds of weird ideas. So God says, when you do it, these things, these natural human drives, then here's the way that you are to do it. And so get all these descriptions of all this kind of stuff. Another thing that's interesting about it is, how in the world are the people supposed to know all this? Well, God set up a system. So how many tribes do we have? That's a trick question. Technically, there's 13. Because Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each get an inheritance. So we have 12 segments. They all get 12 pieces of land. So the leftover tribe is Levi. But Levi doesn't inherit a portion of land. Instead, Levites are given 48 cities. And for those of you who are good at math, you've already figured out that's 4 per tribe. And what were the Levites supposed to do? By spreading them all over the nation, by having Levites in every single tribe, they were to instruct the people, when you make a sacrifice, here's how you do it. Their responsibility was to make sure that the people of the land did according to God's guidelines and standards. And so when they don't do it, what happens? People go offer it on a high place and do things that are outside of God's guidelines. And so that's the purpose behind all of this. And this is how people are supposed to know. If you don't know, you say, look, I made a vow. So you go to a Levite, in the town near you and say, man, I want to make an offering to the Lord. How do I do it? The Levite said, well, here is how God says you're supposed to do it. If this is a whole burnt offering or if this is a peace offering, here's the process that you're supposed to follow. So now verse 11 is where it really starts to get fun. This will be done for each bull or ram, for each lamb or young goat. As many as you offer, so shall you do with each one as many as there are. Every native Israelite shall do these things in this way, an offering a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And if a stranger is sojourning with you, or anyone is living permanently among you, meaning they're not Israelites by birth, and he wishes to offer food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord, he shall do as you do. Okay. This is a very important concept in the Old Testament. Not everybody who lives in Israel is a natural-born Israelite. You could be a Gentile and become an Israelite. And God actually gave a process back in Exodus chapter 12. Verse 48, 49, this is what you do. And so this is it happens a lot. So verse 15, for the assembly, there shall be one statute for you and for the stranger who sojourns with you, a statute forever throughout your generations. You and the sojourner shall be alike before the Lord. One law and one rule shall be for you and for the stranger who sojourns with you. So there's not one set of rules for those that are descendants of Abraham and one set of rules for everybody else. One people of God. And if you were not a descendant of Abraham, you can still become a part of the people of Abraham by attaching yourself to them and committing yourself to them. And there's one law. That's it. All of them. So whether you are a native Israelite or have joined them because you wanted to, there's only one law. These are the ones that you do. So verse 17, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, there we get it again, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land to which I bring you, and when you eat of the bread of the land, you shall present a contribution to the Lord. What in the world is that? Literally, is you'll lift up a lifted up thing. Okay. So they would take these, I don't know how to, what looks like a pancake, and wave it up and down. The King James called it a heave offering because you were heaving it up and down. Most modern translations will call it a wave offering, and so you would wave it up and down. So one of these Sundays, I'll bring a bunch of pancakes in. And we'll be sure to get it on video and post it online. We're offering a wave offering to the Lord. So it says this is what you're supposed to do with it. Of the first of your dough, you will present a loaf as a contribution. Like a contribution from the threshing floor, so you shall present it. Some of the first of your dough you shall give to the Lord as a contribution throughout your generations. Now this is a theme that runs all over the Old Testament. God gets the first because that is a sign partly of dedication, but really a sign of faith. When you give the first, what you're saying is, I believe that God is going to give me more. You don't wait till you have enough and then give to God. You give to God first as an act of faith. And it's the same, when we give to the Lord first and then work from there because, I don't know about you, but most people, if they wait to see if they have enough, don't have enough. But it is an act of faith that we believe that God will continue to provide for us. So when you do it, that's why it's always the first part of your dough you'll present as a loaf as a contribution, and you'll wave it from the threshing floor. Anybody know what a threshing floor is? Wheat's a husk with a kernel inside, and you beat it open on the threshing floor and throw it up in the air with a pitchfork, and the wind blows away the husk and the grain falls back down, and eventually all you have is grain, and then you grind it up and mix it up with some water and a little bit of self-rising flour, a yeast, and then they would actually usually take a metal drum-looking thing and set it over the fire, then just put the dough on there, and it cooks into bread or pancakes or it's literally pancakes, or what we might think is a tortilla. And they wrap stuff up in it and eat it. And people around the world still oftentimes cook that way. And so you have access to wheat. So it's this, you're going to give the first part of it to him. So verse 32, but if you sin unintentionally, that's all of my sins. Yeah, don't we all wish? What does it mean unintentionally? This word means to stagger, to get lost, to go off the path. It means to not walk the right way. So if you sin unintentionally, but who is the you? It's actually plural. This is a problem we have in English. You is singular or plural. Now, not where I come from. Where I come from, you is singular and y'all is plural. And some of you, where you come from, it's yous guys is plural. But in proper English, you is singular and plural. The you here is plural. So y'all. So he's not talking about an individual now. He's talking about the nation as a whole. All of you together. Okay, if all of you together sin unintentionally, and do not observe all these commandments that the Lord has spoken to Moses, and all that the Lord has commanded you by Moses from the day the Lord gave commandment and onward throughout your generations. Then, if it was done unintentionally, without the knowledge of the congregation, like people didn't realize what, the group didn't realize what they're doing, all the congregation shall offer one bull from the herd for a burnt offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So all of us together have messed up. So all of us together pitch in $1 a piece and buy a bull. All right, maybe a couple $100 a piece, buy the bull, but just one on behalf of everybody, with a grain offering and its drink offering according to the rule, and one male goat for a sin offering. So not everybody has to bring one. We're going to offer a bull and a goat and a grain offering and a drink offering on behalf of everybody at one time. So that's what we're going to do. So the priest, who's the one to do all this, is the mediator. The priest will make atonement. It's the regular word for atonement, like in Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement. The priest shall make atonement for all the congregation of the people of Israel, and they shall be forgiven because it was a mistake, and they have brought their offering, a food offering to the Lord, and their sin offering before the Lord for their mistake. Okay? So, here's basically the idea. We're going to make this offering because we know we messed up somewhere. So it kind of covers all of that. The word forgiven is it's one of my favorite words. It occurs 49 times in the Old Testament. 46 is a verb, 3 is a noun. All 49 of them, God is the subject. The normal word for forgive that's used of people forgiving and God forgiving and all actually means to carry. So if you've wronged me, I'll carry it. That's the idea, which we sing that. He carried my sins far away. This is right out of the Bible. That's where it comes from. Jesus bore our sins on the cross. He carried our sins. That's the normal word for forgive. But this particular word means forgive. It's used only when God is subject, because the reality is only God can ultimately and completely forgive. And so it's something that belongs to him. So it's one of those rare words only used with God as subject. And so we offer this offering before the Lord. And the congregation of the people of Israel shall be forgiven, and the stranger who sojourns among them, because the whole population was involved in the mistake. So this is for everyone, just like everyone follows the same rules. So everyone who's a part of the people of God here, they're covered by this one offering. But what happens about an individual that commits a sin unintentionally? Verse 27, if one person sins unintentionally, he'll offer a female goat, a year old, for a sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement before the Lord for the person who makes a mistake when he sins unintentionally, to make atonement for him, and he will be forgiven. You will have one law for him who does anything unintentionally, for him who is a native among the people of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns among them. Okay? Now, I could talk about this someplace, but this seemed like the good place to do it. How valuable were goats in biblical time? Pretty valuable. A goat was what you would normally eat for a big meal. Remember, there's no way to preserve meat, so most of the time they eat birds or rabbits or something small game that you kill it and grill it in one shot kind of thing. That's why a big part of you would kill the fatted calf. Not the big full-grown cow, just the calf, because there's no way to preserve any of the leftover meat. How many times in a day do you think you sin unintentionally? All right. So I think we're in agreement that You stink. I mean, we all sin a whole bunch. How many of you think you could afford this many goats? And it's even worse because they're female goats. So when you kill a female goat, you don't just lose the goat, but all the potential offspring that she would have. So it becomes even more expensive because it's a female goat. So that leads to the fundamental question when we read the law in the Old Testament. And that is, was the law given to be followed that they might have life? Or was the law given to show them that they cannot have life apart from God? That the law is impossible to keep. And God made it intentionally. If you read it, you go, nobody could do all of this. That is actually the view that I take. I do not think that God intended them to try to keep every single command that he gives, because it's impossible to show us our need for the forgiveness that only God can give. That's why in the New Testament, Paul says that the law is a schoolmaster who takes me to Christ. The law shows me that I can't keep the law. Therefore, I need a redeemer, because I am someone who sins unintentionally a whole lot. So I don't think that this law is intended for every afternoon. Can you imagine showing up at the temple every afternoon? By my count, I got about 8 unintentional sins today, so here's part of my flock. You'd be broke pretty quickly. Like some of you'd be broke day 1, if you were honest. And so, it shows. I'm sure that when the people hear this, they're thinking, wow, I can't, there's just too much. And so I need to throw myself on the mercy of God, which, of course, he is a merciful and forgiving God. But unintentional sins aren't the worst kind. If we have some that are unintentional, what are the others? Intentional. But the Bible doesn't use the word intentional. Instead, it says with a high hand. Shake your fist at God, defiant, intentional, deliberate. So verse 30, the person who does anything with a high hand. The word high is the same word that was used back over in verse 19 about the waving things, lifting them up. And so you've lifted up your fist to God. A high hand, whether it's native or sojourner, doesn't make any difference, because same rules, same punishments. Reviles the Lord, blasphemes him, thinks poorly, as speaking, has nothing to do with God. And that person will be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord. He's basically said God's word's not very important. And has broken his commandment. That person shall be utterly cut off. His iniquity shall be on him. Now, how do you cut somebody off? Well, in the book of Numbers, where are they living? In the wilderness. And what are they living in the wilderness? Tents. And we have a bunch of tents together. What do we call that? A campsite. Except the Bible talks about, the camp of the Lord. It's just a campsite. Now, you didn't have to pay a fee. There wasn't like a 3-day limit. No, but basically everybody's living in a tent. And so everybody's in the camp. You're in the wilderness. So when you cut them off, what do you do with them? Send them outside the camp. They're excommunicated, for lack of a better description. So they are to be cut off because of his iniquity that's upon him. Now, all that's pretty understandable. But man, now we run into something very interesting, and I want to talk about two things. The next handful of verses, there are 2 things here that seem to have very little connection. Certainly when we get to verse 37, almost no connection with what we've read so far. So verse 32, while the people of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath. Now, what's he gathering sticks for? For a fire. Well, let's read what happens, and I'll come back and talk about the Sabbath day and stick gathering and all of that. Those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him in custody because it had not been made clear what should be done to him. Like there's no command, here's what you do to someone that is breaking the Sabbath. The Lord said to Moses, the man will be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. And all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones, as the Lord commanded Moses. Wow. Don't you miss church Sunday? So this raises some questions. Is picking up sticks really, an offense worthy of death? So a couple things I want to talk about. First of all, what is the purpose of the Sabbath? Well, rest is one of them. There's actually 3 reasons given in the Old Testament for observing the Sabbath. One is to recognize that God created in 6 days and rested on the 7th. So it's recognition of the creation account in Genesis 1. Another is to physically rest, you and your servants and your kids and all your animals and everything. So just physically to rest. And then Deuteronomy 5, it is to recognize that God has redeemed us from Egypt. And when we gather on Sundays, that's probably the closest one, is a recognition of the redemption that we have. But what is the only rule for the Sabbath? The only rule for the Sabbath is don't do what you do the other 6 days of the week. That's the only rule. Now, it's spelled out in lots of details, but in this culture, there's no stove, there's no heaters, no heat pumps, no that. So what do you cook on every day? Fire. And what do you need for fire? Sticks. That's right. Just need to go pick up some sticks and eat fire. They were commanded not to pick up sticks on the Sabbath, not to start a fire on the Sabbath, which is interesting. If you go to Israel today in a strictly practicing motel, you cannot press a button in an elevator because the rabbis determined that the use of electricity is starting a fire. So you can have electricity going, but on the Sabbath you can't make it start. So in the motel, breakfast is prepared on Friday afternoon, put into like heater containers, not really crock pots, but something similar to that, and plugged into a timer so that it cuts on Saturday morning because they can't actually start it because that's considered starting a fire. The elevators actually stop on every other floor in the motel. And then you get off, so you really want to stay on the odd-numbered floor because 1, 3, 5, 7. Because if you're like on 6 or 8, you either have to go up or down from there. That's really taking it way to the extreme. And by the way, modern Judaism has almost nothing to do with the Old Testament. It's a completely different religion that comes out of the Babylonian Talmud. And it's actually a result of the diaspora in AD 70, and it's actually Pharisee religion that Jesus condemned constantly. The overall majority of what they do has absolutely no basis actually in Scripture at all. It's just kind of sort of tangentially connected. The Talmud is really what stands at the top. And so he can't start a fire, so he's gathering sticks, which means he's going to start a fire and he's going to cook. Is it really a horrible thing to cook breakfast on the Sabbath? No. But what do you do every other day? You cook breakfast. You gather sticks. So the idea is don't work 7 days a week. Don't do what you normally do. So think about this. Once they got into land especially, what did 95 to 98% of the people do for a living? On their family farm. When you're on the family farm and you're eating breakfast and it's the Sabbath, and you look out the window, what do you see? The fields. And what do you think? I need to do this, I need to do this, it's very easy to work 7 days a week. Now, when we talk that way, people think, well, that has nothing to do with us. You bet it does. We don't look out the window and see the fields and have a temptation to work every day, but people work every day. Work goes with us everywhere. Everywhere. And to say, I'm not going to work today is not easy. Let me just check this email. Let me just respond to this text. I just got a couple things I need to do, and that's it. I mean, you can see how difficult it is and how difficult it was for them. So this man is not just doing this, he's doing it unintentionally or with a high hand. With a high hand. He knows the rules. I mean, don't do what you normally do, and he's out here gathering sticks. And who finds him? One person or several people? Several people discover him, and that's going to be important here in a minute. I'll explain what happens. Verse 33, and those who found him. So there's more than one person finds him, and so they are witnesses. So where do they stone him? Inside the camp. And when you cut them off, what do? You take them outside the camp. Now here's the way that it worked when they would stone someone. When I was growing up, here was the image I had of stoning somebody. I need an assistant, somebody that would like to be stoned. I'm looking at you, John. So John has sinned with a high hand. Of course I got a stone, and he deserves to be. So we think, bring him outside the camp. Here's the picture I had. There's like the stoning pit. So he's like there. And then everybody else is kind of up here with something like this. And we all throw rocks at him. And eventually he just dies from that. But that is not the way that they stoned. This was not a stone. This is just yard decoration. This is a stone. And they would stone them at about this distance. It's not a long-range thing, it's this distance. Now here's what's interesting. In order for someone to die of the death penalty, it required a minimum of 2 witnesses who agreed in every detail. So when it says those who found him, we have more than one witness. So you don't execute somebody on a he said, she said kind of deal, on just, my word against yours. It required multiple witnesses agree in every detail. But to make sure that these witnesses didn't collaborate or corroborate ahead of time and get their story straight and falsely accuse someone, the first people who would throw a stone were the witnesses, the accusers. Because it was not uncommon for the first stone or two to actually be the one that brought about death. I mean, if I reared back and just as hard as I could right here at your head, we could put it to an end. This is a totally different kind. Well, I don't know. The rock could probably break it in your head. But it's a totally, oh, thanks. Good job, man. Appreciate it. It's a totally different image when you think of it that way. Not a small little handheld rock like a baseball size or smaller, and we're all kind of throwing it a distance. And, it is oftentimes the accusers. And the reason God set it up this way is because it's going to be very difficult to execute someone if you're the executioner and you know that the person is innocent. So think about this. When the woman's caught in adultery and brought to Jesus, they say this woman was caught in adultery. What did Jesus say? He was without sin, cast the first stone. Jesus wasn't saying, you who are sinless, cast the first stone. What Jesus is saying is, y'all are the accusers. He knew it was a setup. Because according to the Bible, who's supposed to be stoned? The woman and the man. Adultery is one of those sins that requires more than one person, like gossip. And so he said, he knew this whole thing was a setup. And so he's saying, well, those of you who are accusing, it's your responsibility to be the executioner. And they all walked away. Because when those who were the witnesses dropped their stones and walked away, everybody else realized this is a setup. This is a sham kind of deal. And so this man is high hand, and those who caught him are the first ones. So they were like for real knew that this man was guilty. So that kind of helps you understand stoning. It also makes you realize how awesome God is when the Apostle Paul is stoned and then he gets up and walks off. They all think he's dead. He gets up and here we go. So that was stoning, and that's how it would work. And so when you hear stoning, think big rocks smack him in the head sort of thing, really up close. And so he's cut off not because he broke the Sabbath, but because it was with a high hand. Kind of deliberate and intentional. I think the worst thing that anyone can say is, I know what God says, but that's sin with a hand. I actually had somebody say that to me one time, like literally said it to me. They were asking my opinion about something. Now, don't ask my opinion if you don't want it. I tend to be a little more honest. I don't know if it's the right word, blunt. Tell you what I think. I don't know. But anyway, I had someone to ask me, and I was like, well, the Bible says bang, 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 bang. Well, I know what God says, but I'm like, no, hang on, time out right there. Here's the way it's supposed to go. I know what God says, and I want to do it. Like that's, now the reason I word it that way, I'd like to say, and I'm going to do it, but the reality is oftentimes I sin unintentionally. So, and I want to do it is really more kind of the way we go. Then we get something that seems completely unrelated to anything that he has said, and that's about tzitzis. So verse 37, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord to do them. Not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. That just seems not even to fit what we're talking about, so I'll explain it in a minute. So you will remember and do all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. So there's several things here. So let's just start with the whole tassel thing. The idea is you have your robe, your sash, and so you put a tassel, only 4 of them, one at each corner, with a blue thread. And the idea is when you see it, it's to remind you. But we would do the same thing. People used to tie a string around their finger, which didn't do anything, because you look at the string and go, I can't remember what that's for. We've all walked into a room and said, I came in here for something. But the idea is that when you would see it, it would remind you. And a lot of people have things to remind them. They put it someplace, remind them to pray or remind them to read their Bible or whatever it is. Or they have it on their phone. It's an alarm. When you see it, it's to remind me I'm supposed to do the commands of the Lord. It's supposed to be a reminder that way. So you put them at the corners. Now, by Jesus' day, what did the Pharisees do? They enlarged their borders. Well, my tassel is bigger than yours, so I must be more obedient to God. The modern equivalent is, my Bible is a black leather King James Bible, so I must obviously be holier than you are, because yours is just on your phone. Like that's sort of kind of the mentality, that they had. And so that's the tassels. It's really fascinating how this developed and the way it's done. So the Hebrew word for tassel is the word tzitzi. So modern Jews call them tzitzis. However, we don't wear robes and all. So you can go on Amazon and buy a set of 4 tzitzis. And what you do, because most people like wearing, jeans and stuff, is you can actually take them and run them through your belt loops, and then you have a tzitzi. So sometimes you'll see like Jewish people, the guys, and they got these things hanging out. Some of them wear a full deal around their waist, but some of them, it's just one of these things they picked up for a few bucks off of Amazon, and you just took them through your belt loop, and it's supposed to remind you of God's laws. Now, why don't we do that? It's like, classic, ever since the Reformation, the classic understanding of the law has been there's the moral law, which is eternal and applicable in every generation, in every society and culture and down the line. There are ceremonial laws, and these have been fulfilled in Jesus, like the sacrifices and stuff. And then there are civil laws, which apply to their particular culture. Some of those apply in different cultures depending on how their government and all is arranged, and so there's those kind of deals. And so that's the reason we recognize that these have been fulfilled. It's a simple version. Now, if you really want to get nuts, you can go buy a tallit, which is one of these. And a tallit is what the men wear over. You'll see them. They wear them over. You'll see them with them over their heads and all of that. And these also have tassels on the corners. And so they wear them, and this is why I like to go to Israel, because I can get this sort of stuff. Or just get it on Amazon if you like. So you'll see them with these and the tzitzis, so it's called a tallit. And the reality is just wearing something, if it isn't reminding you of the Lord's command, it's worthless. It's not just some empty ritual that we do. It is supposed to be a reminder. And so he says, I want you to do these so they remind you, because what happens to us? Well, we have a tendency to forget. Matter of fact, he says, if you're not reminded, then you will not follow after your own heart. The word follow is a fascinating word. It means to reconnoiter, like recon, to go on recon, but it also means a string of jewels. And don't be surprised, we have words that mean all kinds of crazy stuff. And so, somebody tell me, what is an eye? No, it's the thing on a needle. Yeah, it's like that. And so we have words that, use lots of different kinds of ideas. And so Probably the reason it's translated follow is if you have a string and you slide a pearl on it, then the next one follows it, the next one follows it, the next one follows it, the next one follows it. So that's probably the idea here more than reconnaissance. So you'll tend to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after. Now, what in the world is that? Is he saying that you whore after your own heart and eyes? That makes no sense. This is a very important concept in the Old Testament. Because he's God and we're human and we can't, like, we're on different levels, God uses human analogies for us to understand, at least to try to understand. And so we pray, our Heavenly Father. God's not literally your father, like physically your father. We're adults. I should not have to explain this. I know Mormons think literally he is, but not literally our father. But we need some way to understand our relationship to God. So one of them is father and child. One of the most common ones the Bible uses is the marriage analogy. So God the Father is the husband and Israel's the bride. In the New Testament, the church is the bride, Christ is the husband. It uses this marriage analogy, very, very common. And so if you are married and one of the people who is married is unfaithful, they've violated the covenant. So oftentimes the Bible kind of pictures our sin as adultery or fornication. So there's a difference between adultery and fornication. To commit adultery requires you be married. And it means to cheat on your spouse. The word fornicate, which is the word that's used here, means anything outside of God's standard for the way sex is conducted. So it covers everything from premarital sex to bestiality to incest to anything else you could possibly come up with. Anything outside of God's norm. So this is a big, broad kind of umbrella term. So it says, if I don't give you guidelines, what are you going to do? Make up your own and go running off in directions that you should not. So you need to be reminded of God's instructions so that you will follow them, because if not, the moment could get the best of you. I can remember sitting down with one of my sons and saying, if you're not wanting to have sex with your girlfriend, something's wrong with you. So you need to decide now how you're going to conduct yourself. Because if you wait till the two of you are alone somewhere, I didn't quote this verse, but I probably should have. You'll follow your own eyes. In other words, God's given guidelines, but this is a natural human inclination. I mean, you're a teenage boy. If the fire ain't burning really hot, then something ain't right. I mean, so it's like, but God gives guidelines on how we follow these drives. And so I wanted, I don't know that maybe that was the best way to do it, but it seemed like the right thing at the time. And it's all right. None of you know how to parent either. You're just kind of doing the best you can and hope that God covers the gaps where you sin unintentionally as a parent. And so that's why this imagery is used here, because you will go astray. So you need to keep your eyes focused on the God and His instructions. So remember and do all my commandments and be holy, which means to be separated or dedicated to your God. And now the key verse. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. Why should we do what God has said? Because He is the Lord your God. It's an interesting motivation. We don't obey God so that we'll get healthy, or we'll get rich, or we'll have a good life, or we'll have a wonderful family, or we'll be popular, or any other such thing. We follow God because He is God, and that's good enough. His glory should be enough to motivate us. And the reason is because He is worthy of our trust, and that His guidelines are the best ones for life. Rather than following after our own eyes, we follow His commandments because He is wise and good and caring and merciful and all those. So I'm God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. This is the reason, and this is all the reason that you need. That is the motivation. And so God doesn't have to trick us or did God just look, I'm the Lord your God. I have the right to make these instructions and these guidelines, but they're the right guidelines. I've encountered lots of people as a pastor, and lots of people who have shared lots of the bad, ridiculous things that they did last week and when they were younger and middle-aged. And, I've never had a person ever tell me they regret walking with the Lord. I've never had anybody say, God's way of doing it, it was a mistake for me to do that. I should have done my own thing. No one has ever said that, because God is wise and his ways are right. His ways are good. And so the reason for all of this is because I'm the Lord your God.